You're going to hear about the latest in ATM cybersecurity standards and tools. But first, I want to talk about an actual incident. We had the CEO summit yesterday, and we had Maersk present, the shipping company, not Petra, and it's fair to say, taking them through the timeline of events and their big incident was a bit of an eye-opener for them all. So I'm going to do a little bit of that. I'm not going to tell you about the target organisation. I'm sure many of you know them, but we'll leave you guessing for now. So the story starts in February 2017 when a vulnerability was found in the Apache Struts web framework. So that's middleware, basically like Swim will be for ATM, sitting between the operating system and the application. And about a month later, that vulnerability was formally announced, and it was a bad one. It's easy to use, but has maximum impact, basically giving you full access to the system, allow you to run remote code. It's bad. A day after that, the Department of Homeland Security issued an alert, and our target organization received that a day later and sent it out to their applications team. That should have been the end of the story. But mistake number one was the mailing list wasn't up to date and it didn't go to the right people. That same day, they ran a vulnerability scan on their system, but because they ran it on the wrong directory, it wasn't picked up. A couple of days later, they ran another vulnerability scan using a different tool, using updated signatures, and again, it wasn't picked up. The day after that, they held a team meeting to talk about this critical vulnerability, and despite having had the system in operation for 40 years, patched it earlier in the year, they hadn't yet realized they had this vulnerability. Skipping forward from March to May, May the 13th, that vulnerability was exploited. It was through a customer-facing system, so much as an ANSP might communicate real-time data to airports. That online system was compromised. Some other scripts were run, and very quickly, because they had unencrypted passwords, no internal controls, those attackers, still unidentified, had complete access to this system. What then followed was 76 days of complete unfettered access, running 9,000 database queries, pulling off the data to 35 IP addresses. Now, 76 days sounds like a long period of time, but actually that's better than a statistical average. Normally it takes 100 days plus to identify a breach of your networks. Again, this should have been picked up because there was some network monitoring going on, but the certificate required for that monitoring to be effective had expired 19 months ago. So that was mistake number 3, if you're counting. That was finally fixed on July the 29th, and it was immediately apparent there'd been a breach. Lots of red flags went up. 2 days later, they had to pull down the service. 2 days after that, there was a very interesting conversation, I suspect, between the security team and the CEO, who had to be told that 148 million people's personal data has been compromised. 2 days after that, they brought in the forensics team, the FBI. 5 days after that, they went public, and that was compounding the disaster because the call centers are overrun and people didn't have access to correct and timely information about what had been stolen and the impact on them. So I go through this because the topic is, are you ready? This organization clearly wasn't. Any guesses to who that organization was? It was Equifax. And there's a really fascinating report that you can read online. And it's fascinating because it is literally the what not to do on cybersecurity, written by the authority known as the Congress in the States. I've I've pulled out a couple of quotes from it, and actually, to try and draw the parallels between that and ATM, the first is around cybersecurity complacency. I've been in various ANSPs, and often there's a lot of active work going on, but not all of that gets taken through to completion. The remediations aren't always put in place in a timely fashion. A lack of accountability and no clear lines of authority. That means great policies not put into practice. Again, sometimes you can see that in ATM. It was particularly apparent with Equifax. They had a good process. They had identified the application owner, the system owner, the message was meant to go out, the vulnerability was meant to be put in place. Would have been almost zero cost to fix this thing. But instead, the day after the announcement, their stock price fell 35%, wiping $6 billion off the market valuation. The inherent security risks of operating legacy IT. That also feels familiar. One of the challenges for ATM is we have a lot of legacy systems, we have modernization efforts. How do we do that transition in a secure way? This report talks about antiquated, complex IT, making it much, much harder. And I think we've got some of that in this industry too. And the last point, entirely preventable. This was actually something easy to fix, but it wasn't. Clearly not ready. So how do you know that you're ready, that your NSP, you as a supplier, are ready for cyber attacks? Various things you can consider. Do you have a happy regulator? Are they happy with what you're doing? Is that sufficient? Well, actually, the regulators themselves don't have that much cyber knowledge. They're still learning. They're trying to force policies into place which might not be appropriate for safety-critical ATM systems. Second, do you have ISO 27001 certification, the IT standard in this space? I think that's a really great start. It'd be fantastic if more operators, more suppliers had that. But there's lots of wrinkles to work through in terms of its application to safety-critical environments and how to deal with operational technology as well as IT. So a good starting point, but again, maybe not the silver bullet answer. Do you have some metrics that you can report to management? Is everything on the up? They're looking better and better. Well, again, helpful. And if you choose the right metrics in particular, then great. If it's the number of vulnerable systems you've got, or how frequently you look at the third-party access that you have in your own systems, then maybe we're getting somewhere. But obviously, metrics are a limited picture too. Have you been through a risk assessment process, risk acceptance? Have you got that all documented in a security case? If so, great, well done. That works very well for individual organizations, but as we know, aviation is systems of systems. It's all about data sharing now. It's about having other stakeholders on board, network managers, the airports, the airlines, real-time information flow. How do we know that those individual cases stack up in a bigger picture? Penetration tests, red teaming, exercise results, actually some hands-on beating up of the system and getting some answers. Again, really good. Like to see more of it, but as the CEO Summit concluded yesterday, actually that is one perspective on something, and again, doesn't give you a full holistic picture of risk at the end of the day. So there isn't a silver bullet, there isn't one thing to do. What is happening is we're starting to see more and more good practice documents, standards being produced, and it's worth us as an industry reflecting on whether those are sufficient, whether they're good enough, how do we start to apply them. So the first one that I want to make sure you're all aware of is EN 16495, quite cryptic, produced by CEN and is an ATM information security standard. It's an extension of those IT controls within the ISO 27000 family. What it tries to do is provide aviation-specific guidance on top of what is already within ISO 27002. I think importantly, it introduces the idea of levels of trust, that different organizations sharing data, having to share risk information, may need complete trust or may need limited trust. If it's more limited information sharing, how much do you need? And it's the first systematic attempt, I guess, to say, well, if we're fully trusting, then it's these controls with this level of assurance sat behind it. And it's also the first ATM standard that I've seen that has the word safety and security together. You look at the safety standards out there, and the word security, you can't find it, basically. And this is saying that you need to take a coordinated approach between safety and security. It's about the right touch points between separate processes to have a total hazards and total impacts view, namely that a security incident could cause a safety impact, and you need to work through how that comes together. It's fair to say this is a fairly controversial standard in the sense of, does it bring enough added value to be a standard out there in that space? And I know that's a live topic within the industry's experts. The next one I want to mention is ED 205. So it's a new Eurokai standard that should be published by the end of this month. 16495 should be first half of this year if it goes to plan. And here you've got a standard that's being produced to be the equivalent of airworthiness security standards. And the question that it's trying to answer is, what does the aircraft and the airline need to know about the ground ATM systems to be sure that if there's an unauthorized interaction on the ground ATM system, it doesn't affect the aircraft? And similarly, if there's an unauthorized interaction on the aircraft, then it doesn't affect the ground ATM system. So it's trying to put those different pieces of the puzzle within aviation together. It doesn't just look at safety as an impact, it's also operational disruption. So I think ATM as a service is really important to consider alongside safety impacts. It assumes that you've already got a good security management system in place and is therefore more detailed, looking at the system level. What's the process that you need to go through with an authority, whoever that might be, and that's pointing towards future regulation in space, certainly within Europe. And it introduces a number of minimum compliance claims. So you follow a risk management process and you make a number of claims about the system, that we've done a complete enough risk assessment, that we've put the controls in place, that we've tested those controls, that we've aligned things with safety. You have to then give evidence against those claims to show that you've met them. And again, it has a very similar approach to safety and security, saying coordination is important, you fail safe over failing secure, and giving some of the guidance that might be helpful to ANSPs and manufacturers in this space. Is it a perfect standard? Is it going to answer every question we've got? Certainly not. Is it actually quite a complicated process to be applied? Yes, but it's a first start to get that discussion going. And the authorities in Europe, at least, EASA, are looking at it as a potential means of compliance for what they want to do with regulation in this space. The third one I want to talk about is a new ATM cybersecurity maturity model. It's something that I've had a bit of a hand in under contract to Eurocontrol and the network manager. And it's quite a lightweight tool, but intended to provide top management, those CEOs that came along to the summit yesterday, what's the minimum that they need to know to be able to track what the service provider, what the suppliers are doing in this space. So understanding strengths, weaknesses, in order to guide future investment. And at the same time, hopefully it's packaging together some of the good practices that the industry are seeing, starting to develop and put into place, and encourage discussion on what those actually might be. So how was it developed? It was through coordination and collaboration with various ANSPs, which I do need to thank at the bottom there. First principle was about keeping it simple. The motto of the group was something simple enough that grandma could understand. And this might be related to the next point. I need to be slightly careful in case we have top management here, but it was make it visual, make it easy to report so that even top management can understand it and get it and not get bogged down in detail that doesn't give them the 30,000-foot view that they need. Next was to align it with the CANSO standard of excellence in this space. It's a mature discipline. It's got the benchmarking activity behind it. Is there a cyber equivalent that could fit with this to provide something useful for the sector? But of course, it's a model, and as we all know, models aren't a true representation of life. Is a model useful enough rather than is it complete and accurate enough? So it's not intended to be a replacement for a comprehensive audit. And you can do all this fancy assessment stuff, but at the end of the day, unless you're making the right investment decisions and putting controls into place, it's a bit pointless. So help make sure it drives those decisions at the end of the day and the actions that follow. How did we go about pulling something together? Well, we used other standards, the two that are very widely known. NIST, the cybersecurity framework there, quite helpful because it's there, engineers quite like it. It's got a through-life approach about identifying critical systems, protecting them, detecting anomalous behavior, responding to it, recovering from incidents, etc. But it was felt that I was missing something really important, which is that the management, the governance, the leadership piece is absolutely critical, particularly as we're getting traction with these improvement programs. So they're really keen to have the leadership elements from ISO 27001 in there as well. So we took those, merged them together, got the NSPs to flag up critical areas, critical questions, test it internally. And this is just a picture of what the output can look like. It's not actually any ANSP, but it's got 13 different categories against which it's assessed on a simple numeric scale. And you can see the way we used it for the network manager was to look at the internal security, but then look at the security being provided by the top suppliers. We actually did the top 10, and you can place them in order and see that in terms of your supply chain security, those suppliers who are providing data or services or introducing new equipment into your critical environment, they need to be assessed as well. And again, this is just a tool that quite quickly puts together a visual map of what's good and what's bad. Just to go into that in a little bit more detail, one category is around leadership and governance, again saying that's really important. The example here for a level 3 organization, plan is funded and with visible top management commitment. And we knew from that Equifax example that wasn't the case there. The Chief Information Security Officer and CIO hadn't got it on the path, they'd been separated. Security was actually under legal, which meant that the security people never went to top management meetings, so the messages weren't getting through, and there wasn't that buy-in and support from top management. And there's a link to safety through the management system part. So what we're saying is that as maturity grows, you should start to see quite independent disciplines become more coordinated and feeding in those security events which could cause safety hazards and making sure that safety is the ultimate priority. just as another example, again, the detail is available in the document, but we pulled out things like access controls on systems and linking those to logs. I've been in a lot of machine rooms in European ANSPs, at least, and there are shared passwords, which were great in the past because it's easy to manage, you trust each other in the technical team, that's great. But if there's anything that goes wrong, you need to be able to link that back to the individual. That's step one of forensics, and unless you've got some access controls and logging in place, that's impossible to do. Human aspects, so quite often security people say humans are the weakest link. Actually, how's that normally addressed? Well, it's through awareness sessions, it's through training, but actually how often do we measure the effectiveness of those? Are behaviours changing as a result? Are we doing tailored training and systematic follow-up for different groups of people within the organisation? So again, we're saying at the more mature levels, that sort of stuff should be the norm. And the final one that I'm going to just talk through is a primary reliance on network protection. So you may have come across the idea of castle walls. If you build a wall high enough, strong enough around your critical assets, then you're okay. That worked in the past, but with the need for interconnectivity, data sharing nowadays, there's always holes through there. And as the Equifax and Maersk examples showed, the lack of internal segmentation made a potentially minor incident into something massive. It nearly killed Maersk, and it was the 148 million people affected having their privacy compromised through Equifax. So it really made things catastrophic. What does all that lead to? Well, it should be an assessment, it should be a target, and you don't need to be the highest level of maturity, you need to be what's necessary given your threat environment. It's not about introducing new requirements, those requirements should be in place already, and you end up with a roadmap of improvements that then can be tracked and shown to senior management and the board to show that you're making progress. How to get hold of a copy of this? Well, Eurocontrol about to publish it, and the new CANSO Global Cyber Safety Task Force, of which I have the honour to be currently heading up, is hopefully going to take it and make it a CANSO product available to all ANSPs and the industry at large. So I'd recommend that you look into that one. I've got a few minutes for any questions on that before I do a roundup of what I've introduced you to. Has anyone got any questions? Silence. Okay. Do come and see me afterwards if you have a burning question that you don't want to share. So, take a summary. We started with Equifax, and it's just worth saying that the ultimate consequences of that was that within that organization, the CEO had to step down, the CIO and CSO were given accelerated retirement. I guess it's the euphemism for being booted out, and others got the boot as well. And actually, whilst I spent a lot of time making the case for better security, and yes, it is about ensuring safety and avoiding expensive outages and doing the compliance piece and all that. Actually, at the end of the day, for a lot of people, especially management, it's about avoiding being put in the hot seat in the sort of congressional inquiry that we saw with Equifax. Could you defend yourself, perhaps in a legal setting, that the actions you took or the actions that you didn't take to protect the service, to be able to respond better, were actually what was necessary? And if you can't defend those actions and justify it, then actually you could be in a really bad, serious place if there's a major incident. And of course, we always say it's a matter of when, not if. Next, is throwing down a challenge to industry. But industry must define and achieve good practice. That will evolve over time. I think we're still in the early stages of this journey towards cybersecurity. But aviation's got a fantastic opportunity to work together in this space. We don't compete on safety. There's no reason to compete on security. And actually, by working together, we should be a lot stronger and do it more efficiently than by doing it individually. We've seen 2 standards and 1 maturity model that are becoming available within a very short time frame. And they should help. They should be useful things, but they are only tools. There's no silver bullet. They do need to be tested more, some feedback built in to make a better end product at the end of the day. There's a very real risk that by having multiple standards and more guidance material, that actually it just confuses the matter rather than helps on things. At the end of the day, it's about risk management, and that's risk awareness, it's assessment, it's doing something about it, it's accepting those risks within management, by customers, by the regulator, and a holistic approach. None of those methods, nor the standards, nor the tools alone are going to be sufficient. So it's about very much a holistic and comprehensive approach. And ultimately, the very last thing is so many words have been spoken about cybersecurity in ATM and aviation. So many working groups, so much talk about regulation, the standards, the guidance documents that are out there. But that's actually not what's going to make the difference at the end of the day. It is the fixing of vulnerabilities. It's about having the right people on that mailing list. It's about using those vulnerability scanners properly. It's about rehearsing incidents. It's the safety and security teams working together. And everything else that we need to do, the actual actions that move us forward on our journey, rather than just talking about it, writing about it. So if there's one thing to say, it's yes, there are words, but we need to see the actions. And I think that was really accurately captured in the CEO conference yesterday. They seem to be aware, engaged, knowing the need to do more. And I think there's still that opportunity to enable the future ATM world that we want. We want the benefits from technology, but we need to do that in a secure enough way, a safe enough way, a resilient enough way. And it's the actions and inactions that ultimately determine how ready you are for the inevitable cyber attack. That's me. Thank you very much. If you have questions, comments, or want to receive a copy of the maturity model, come and see me afterwards. But thank you.
So, insecure systems cannot assume to be safe. ATM has been fantastically good at improving safety over time, but cyber threats are causing new concerns, new challenges, and unless we can adequately control our technical infrastructure, so the networks, the servers, the applications, then we cannot assume that we are safe. If a cyber event occurs, then effectively you've lost control from that, and safety could be impinged. It's a new discipline, and I truly believe that safety and security need to sit side by side in a coordinated approach with the right communication at the right times between the teams, rather than trying to say it's one integrated discipline. I think they can work really well together and have an immediate improvement in what we're trying to do. And obviously, AT SEPs are absolutely critical to that.